So I've been asked to do a live show. It's during quarantine, so it's live for camera here at Gray Area in the theater. It has been empty for almost a year now, and they've been doing this series where they have people come in and do solo or duo performances for camera, and then it's streamed live on Gray Area's website. And I'm very excited to do it, but I'm quite unprepared. We're shooting it in about a week. I have no ideas. I haven't been thinking in live terms so much. But what this has got me thinking is about the ways in which I am ready as a musician. I remember a long, long time ago, decades ago, I was talking to Jeff Hunt, who at the time and maybe still currently ran Table of the Elements, the label, and he had put together this structuralist film festival showing like Paul Scherritz and Tony Conrad films. We were talking about the trio AMM, and he said that he hates the term experimental music because it sort of infers that the artists don't know what they're doing. And then decades later, here I am, pretty much embracing the concept of being an experimental musician, almost because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I spend almost 7 days a week with my hands on synthesizers, with my sleeves rolled up, working on music, and have for a really long time. But I always sort of feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is a bit self-inflicted. I like to experiment. I like to not know the outcome. It's for other people to decide whether or not what I do is very scripted or very tired or whatever, but I do try to approach things with an open mind and fresh ears. But the other aspect to it is, I think, what Jeff Hunt might have been referring to as don't know what they're doing in a sort of pejorative way, that I don't have chops. Although I've played some pretty complicated music in my life, I don't come at my instruments with a sort of tradition of playership. And so I can't sort of go and rely on something traditional when I have a show in a week. I can't just go, well, I can play piano better than anybody, so I always know that I can just go nail that. Even though that might be true with synthesis, it's a more abstracted sort of skill set. I'm not really relying on hundreds of years of tradition of what it means to be a musician when working on a piece. Instead, I'm sort of relying on a very fresh and evolving skill set where interfaces change every year and where the tools are evolving so quickly that no one can grab a laptop and work with synthesis with the sort of dexterity and intuition that someone who has been playing guitar for 20 years would have. At the same time, I don't want to undervalue what I do and what I can do. I play very slowly and very methodically and very meditatively, and that's what I'm going to do for this performance. I just don't know what that's going to look like. So this is many days later, many days of working at what this performance is supposed to be. And despite what I said earlier, my first instinct when composing this piece was to write a bunch of complicated synth parts. And I did, and I was practicing them. But part of the composition, the intro, was this very minimal, delicate layering of sine waves weaving and overlapping. When I was working on that part, I felt like I could just bathe in that sound for hours. So I had to ask myself, what am I trying to prove that I can do something more complicated and showy? So now I'm just exploring that far more minimal approach, which is my comfort zone, and I think is far more interesting. I think that's the irony of being dedicated to some sort of minimalism. The more interesting I try to make something, the less interesting it becomes. I mean, to me. I'm the only one who matters, right? However, with this approach, shirking some sort of neurotic obligation to make things complicated, and thereby create something other than what I want to hear, I run the risk of stagnation. That is, if I give in to the urge to just do what I know and what I'm comfortable with as a habit, I'll be repeating myself and I'm going to get bored. And I worry about that far more than I worry about not performing a more trad version of musician for an audience. One of my favorite parts of preparing for a solo show is that before I get to perform for an audience, I get to perform for myself. I have to sit in a room and play with my favorite toys and use my favorite techniques to generate my favorite sounds and see where I can go. Something that seems very central to being an electronic musician is that you're essentially, usually, a one-man band. One-man band is just a turn of phrase, but I take it somewhat seriously as something to resist. I resist not like with a capital R, not like with a raised fist, more like resist like eschew. Like I eschew the traditional construction of the artist as a lone figure, like a man struggling against the world with some sort of patriarchal idea of the muse sending him on his hero's journey. It's a tired, lazy, overdetermined mythology that I am not interested in. And then the band part of One Man Band has its own rockist baggage that I'm not interested in engaging with in my solo work. Solo music performance is definitely not very novel, but with this kind of electronic gear-related music, so much is possible from just one human performer. But how much that human is actually performing diminishes with the increase of used options. That is, I can perform an orchestra of sounds with my gear, but I would not be so much playing all of those sounds as pressing play on those instruments. So how much am I relying on a laptop or sequencers to support what I am actively doing with my body? How much am I interfacing with instruments versus how much am I composing in advance and letting the machines do the work in the live environment? I mean, I don't feel compelled to do a lot when I perform, but if I do too little, I'm going to lose interest, and so is my audience. I recently watched Bunch of Kunst, the documentary about Sleaford Mods. Sleaford Mods are this duo who, when performing live, are a vocalist and a guy who presses play on a laptop, and then he stands and drinks his beer with his other hand in his pocket, bobbing his head to the music that he has already pre-recorded. And that's great, and it shouldn't be any other way. I identify with that because I usually feel that my best performances are more tied to my being an active, participating listener than some sort of performer.